So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. It's good to be with you all this evening, and hopefully I'll say a little bit about sort of why now is a good time to be involved, and also happy to answer any questions that you may have. So just a little bit about myself. I've been involved in the Brexit debate from the very beginning, really. I sort of began the journey by working on the 2016 referendum. Afterwards, I worked with Dominic Grieve and a few other Conservative MPs to try and get a second referendum. I then became responsible for the day-to-day running of the Conservative Group for Europe, as it was then. We then rebranded the Conservative European Forum. I took a short break when I worked as David Gauke's campaign manager and agent when he stood as an independent. That was when Boris Johnson removed the whip, I think it was from 19 MPs who were trying to prevent a no-deal Brexit. Sort of, yeah, ran that campaign then. And then for almost a year, I've been working at the European movement itself. I really focus on political affairs at Westminster as well as some sort of policy and communications work. So the reason I do that is just to highlight, if you look at the last 9 years of my CV, it's very much been dominated by Brexit, the UK's relationship with the EU, and the Conservative Party's long struggle with Europe. So the first thing to say, I'm very used to losing, particularly in the last few years. And yes, I'm a Conservative, so I hope you won't hold that against me this evening. I want to show that I've really ridden sort of the Brexit wave. All the highs, the lows, the twists, the turns. I guess like many of you, we've been through the marches, the efforts to avoid no deal, getting annoyingly close to a second referendum, and everything in between. And so as I sort of prepared for this, I sort of did a little look back, and I can honestly say I've never been as optimistic as I am today. So since 2016, I thought we were going to win the referendum, but since that day, I've never been as optimistic. Um, Optimistic about the future relationship with the EU, but also about the role the European movement can play in shaping that. So then sort of the question was on to why now. I think for the first time in years, we are working with the political current, not against it. And that for me is a huge difference. We've got a Labour government, and we'll have one for the next few years at least, that speaks openly about strengthening relationships with the EU. In May, we had the first UK-EU summit, and we now know that these summits will take place every year. And for me, the summits matter because they create deadlines, they put pressure on leaders to deliver, and generally speaking, they're quite good to get results because people want to show that they've got a win. And the first summit was more positive than pretty much any of the commentators, the politicians expected it to be. Sort of both sides, they agreed to negotiate an SPS veterinary agreement, which is quite complicated, but essentially it will remove checks on agri-food exports to the EU and vice versa. And that was a big thing that businesses wanted. They've agreed to negotiate a youth mobility scheme, work to rejoin Erasmus Plus, a new security and defence partnership, linking emissions trading systems, which means British businesses won't pay carbon tariffs when they export to the EU, which are due to come in next year. Also in the common understanding, they talked about rejoining the internal electricity market, which once again, no one really understands what it's meant to be now. But that was important, I think, because it shows we're talking about parts of the single market beyond goods, which before we weren't doing. And so there's definitely some movement there, some things are happening. And they agreed to talk about professional mobility, support for the creative industries, keep these issues alive and on the agenda and hopefully get some solutions to them. So we're in a much better place than we were, and things are moving in the right direction. And we always knew that rebuilding relations were going to be slow, but the next few years, I think, are really critical. We already need to be thinking about the next summit. What do we want from it? What are the priorities? What do we want to push further? And sort of speaking to government, I know that they want to move quickly on this as well. It's in their interests. The faster they can deliver agreements that bring benefits to people's pockets, careers, education, whatever it may be, the stronger their case is for going further and faster in the future. And I think that's important for them and also for us, sort of to combat the rise of the populist right. If we can show there's benefits of the changes we've got, hopefully there'll be public support to go even further next time. And politics is more fluid now than at any time that I can remember. I think that is in part because of Brexit. That does make it hard to predict Westminster 5 years from now. But what we do know is that we have an opening, a window of opportunity to lay the foundations for a much closer UK-EU relationship right now. We've got to use these next few years are critical if we are going to rejoin, if we are going to go in the single market or customs union. We've got to put those building blocks in place now while we can. That's sort of, I think, a key point. And that's genuinely why I do think now is the best time to get involved, perhaps since 2019, because the changes are within reach. I think they're closer now than they have been for years, and that's why I think branches like this matter enormously. As you know, I don't need to tell you guys, applying pressure to MPs, organising events, talking to local business about the impact, and many others. They do make a difference. Those stories, those case studies are powerful, and they get noticed. And while sort of particularly the Labour Party, while they are open to pressure and influence, now's the time to apply, I would suggest. And just I was going to sort of add on to that. Perhaps some of you do, some of you don't know. The European Movement, we've set up the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Europe, the APPG on Europe, and we provide the secretariat to that. And what we're doing with the APPG, we're making sure MPs and members of the House of Lords sort of debate these issues, apply pressure, and put forward ideas. And the government has said to us, not only do they welcome the APPG, they've essentially said, hold our feet to the fire. This is what they want. They want to be pushed to move quickly and to aim higher. So that's why I think now really is the time. We have the political winds at our back. We've got momentum on our side, which is something we haven't had for such a long time. And I think the more people that get involved in branches like this and nationally, the stronger our hand will be in shaping the future of UK-EU relations. So that's kind of a very quick summary that I've run through, sort of my reasons to be optimistic and my reasons why I think people should get involved because of the time we're in now. Happy to answer any questions or go into anything specifically in more detail. So I hope that was fine.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, no, it was really good. And I like your optimism. It's sometimes it's difficult to hold that optimism. I feel sometimes Labour's a bit slow in how they move forward, but actually, you've just changed my mind a little bit. Actually, been moving quicker than what I thought they were. So that's really, really good to hear that optimism. Yeah, fantastic.
I mean, that's the first. Yes, it's slower than a lot of us would like, but it is going in the right direction, and it is quicker, if I could positive, on what most people were expecting.
Yeah, it sounds like it is from what you've told me, actually. Yeah.
They are doing these things, and they're doing quite a lot of it, but quite a bit of it's only behind the scenes, and you only know these things if you take a particular interest in it like we do. So they don't seem to be trying to take the general public with them or explain why they feel it's necessary to do this. And one of the things that we find when we're campaigning on the street is most people don't really know much about what's going on in the news. They don't understand how the systems work. They didn't understand. Funnily enough, I think some people actually understood how the EU worked better than they understood our own country. But how do we get? I mean, I think it would help if the government was more open about what they were doing and actually explained why they think it's beneficial to the country to do these things. Because even then, they're only going to get through to a minority of the general public. Because, I mean, quite honestly, around here, we find most people do not take any notice of what's going on. They just look at, unless it's on Twitter or Facebook or something, they won't see it.
No, that's a good point. I can't speak for the government, obviously, but I think they're incredibly worried of reform at the moment. So what I take away is they want to try and avoid some of these. Maybe this is not the right strategy, but I'm trying to explain what I think their strategy is. They want to try and avoid some of these debates, get the deals done, and then people will hopefully feel the benefits, if that makes sense. So the SPS, the veterinary agreement, which is complicated to explain to the average person who's sort of not involved in these things, that will hopefully really be a big boost to British businesses. And if that can bring some prices down, they hope people will feel it that way. Likewise, they want us to rejoin the internal electricity market. Once again, even the experts, I think, that negotiated the trade and cooperation agreement don't really understand what our relationship in energy was meant to be. But basically, they want to try and get back into the internal electricity market which I think it's costing us about 300 million a year, I think. Don't quote me on that figure, because of our training system inefficient. So if we get that back in, that might bring energy prices down a tiny bit, so they can show the benefit. The issues around these things, though, it will involve us, if you heard the concept, dynamically aligning, which if you were reform, that would mean taking EU rules, if they were going to spin it that way. And although it is a far off role, a role for the European Court of Justice. So these are big debates the government is gearing up for, actually, I would suggest, because they need primary legislation in Westminster to do a lot of this. And some debates are going to come, I think, and the government will be making the case why it wants to do these things. But I agree with you, it hasn't done it as robustly as it could have done so far, but I think it will. But that's just my sort of reading between the lines, if that was helpful at all. But just to summarize, I think they want to try and show tangible benefits, the pound in people's pockets, the education opportunities. They want to try and show the benefits of these things, rather than get bogged down into sort of the debates about sovereignty and that sort of thing.
Yeah, as long as they then explain how they've done it. Because one of the things that we also found when we were campaigning during the People's Vote time is a lot of people took things that came from the EU for granted, and they did not believe that they would go. They just thought they were there, something in the ether, or something like, it's like nobody thinks about the oxygen they breathe in and out every day. And so people might start noticing these things improve, but it has to be actively linked through. And I don't know how you persuade a timid government, because we also campaigned in one of the so-called red wall areas most of the time, and the politicians did not seem to be getting it right. Most people did not care whether we were in the EU or not. And it was the media and the politicians that were projecting their own views onto everyone else.
Simon, you mentioned the good guys, David Gork. Who else did you mention? But you mentioned the good guys.
Dominic Grieve.
Dominic Grieve.
These are my Tories. These are my kind of Tories.
Yeah.
Right. But listen, they're my kind of Tories as well. I don't vote Tory, but they are my kind of Tories. And how much of the old Tory party is, I'll use the word sensible, when it comes to Europe?
It's alive, but it's on life support. Because my background is in sort of conservative pro-Europeanism. Perhaps that's why I've got to be an optimist. It is still there. It is still there, but it's going to be incredibly hard in these next couple of years. There are still some good MPs. We're very much talking about single digits now, who would be prepared to sort of make a more pragmatic case for UK-EU relations, but it does still exist. I think with the Tory party, it's very much going to be a long-term project. Leaving aside the whole reform, if that eclipses them, which I appreciate is a big issue, but leaving aside, we've got to get the Tory party into a position where it's more open to closer UK-EU relations, because the European Union is not going to make substantive changes if there's going to be a threat of a Tory government in the next election going to undo all the good work. Quite how we do that yet, I'm very much open to suggestions, but yeah, and part of me hopes maybe when some of the changes come through and the country's kind of accepted them or welcomed them, the Tory party, which has been famously pragmatic, can rediscover some of that and think, oh, actually, this isn't a bad idea. People like this. There might be some votes here. And they do pivot in that direction. That is how I think it's going to happen. How long that will take, I'm not quite sure.
I think we're going to wait a long time for a kind of groundswell of public opinion, unless politicians emerge to make the case and lead people back towards Europe. I think waiting for the general public it's a long game.
I mean, we've still got figures, like I mentioned, Dominic Grieve, David Gork. that do stand up and make those arguments. I appreciate they're not in Parliament anymore, so they do carry less weight than if they were sitting MPs, but there are still centre-right voices, and so there's the Conservative European Forum, which I used to work for. So there are groups within the Tory party that do still hold these positions, these sort of more moderate one nation, to use a shorthand term, positions. They're still there. And actually behind the scenes, I would say they are still active to a good degree. Yeah, to a good degree. So I think it's not all doom and gloom. They're certainly the minority in the party, but they are still there.
If we were to move towards PR, would that effectively, by softening the extremes, make it easier?
My inclination would be yes, actually. Yes, I think it would. And I know sort of some senior Tories who were all their political lives completely against PR. And they've watched how things have gone the last couple of years. And they've actually maybe it's not such a bad idea. Because, a key argument for first past the post was that it delivers strong and stable governments. And, the last few years have completely disproven all of that. So I do think there is more openness for PR, even on the centre right, and I do think you're right in what you say. It would soften some of the edges. It would bring the centre left to the centre right in sort of similar coalitions, which their approach to Europe is the same. I think it would give more stability in the approach to Europe, and therefore the European Union would be more open to a closer relationship because they know it's not going to get overturned at a next general election. So I think that's a good point.
But certainly when you look at the government in Southern Ireland, it's much more stable than ours has. The balance of power between the two major parties has changed in the last election, but it's still pretty much the same government.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, the Republic of Ireland, I can't remember.
It's a smaller population. It's
so
there will always be fewer extremes.
The exact system they have in the Republic, it sort of pits people in their own party against each other, doesn't it? Because you want to be top of your list in each region to get selected. Yeah. But no, I think your broad point, I completely agree with. I think it would make things easier for the European question if we have PR.
One of our assumptions is that if we're going to persuade politicians to support moving closer to Europe, they'll only do that if they see public opinion is behind it. In Staffordshire, we've just gone reform wall to wall at a county level. How on earth do we deal with that, in terms of shifting public opinion, which is what we try to do day in and day out, when actually opinion seems to be moving in the opposite direction.
But even that though, Cliff, if you look at the voting figures and the proportion of people who turned out to vote, it was between about 32 and 41% across the county. So an average, I believe, of about 36%, and Reform got about 40% of that vote. So I think I worked it out at the time that they got elected across the board almost on about 16% of the electorate. So it's apathy wins all the time.
Well, maybe that's what we're fighting against, reform and apathy.
but also on that point, even I think particularly the youth mobility scheme, I think the polling suggests even Reform voters support a youth mobility scheme. So, if you sort of break it down to issue by issue, for example, the European Movement launched a campaign on the environment and climate, the environment and energy. Even Reform voters would support strengthening UK relations in that area if it brought their electricity bills down. So I think if, on a case-by-case basis, you can find support on the issue, perhaps is a different way of looking at it. I think there is some polling as well. To what degree, because Farage doesn't talk about Brexit really anymore, and we know why, but to what degree can you separate Reform and their view, or maybe strengthen UK relations in specific areas? I'm not talking about rejoin at this stage, but I think even within the Reform leading population, you might find sort of segments of supports for specific changes.
Yeah.
Just to back up,
it
sorry,
worked
Cliff,
for Horizon, didn't it? We got back into Horizon, so
Yeah, I noticed as well, actually, like, I've only been campaigning for about 5 years myself. And this year, especially when we're talking about Erasmus, what you're saying about a case by case basis, Simon, I've noticed actually, when you start talking about Erasmus, not everybody would lead with how they voted in 2016, which is quite unusual, because if you talked about the single market, people would start by saying, well, I'd never wanted to leave, or I voted to leave. When you say Erasmus, the first question is normally, what's that? And then I give my 2-line explanation of what it is. And because I can't remember as much as Liz and Helen, so I'd give a 2-line explanation. and then they say, oh no, that sounds really interesting. And they never talk about how they voted or how they feel about the EU, but they seem interested in that kind of education aspect of it, which is quite interesting. So yeah, maybe you're right in what you're saying there. You know, people, I feel people are more apathetic. I don't know if it's like that across the country, but it feels like that in Staffordshire. But maybe that can leave the door open to a case by case thing, rather than just go full rejoin, or join, as we should say now.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel what it's like around the country in terms of apathy, or do you get much feel for that?
Yeah, well, it's not on people's agenda, really. You know, a few years ago it was number 1 or 2 or 3 issue, and I think, you know, UK relationship, it's fallen massively down, and there's positives and negatives to that. I think, you know, because it's not on people's agenda, the government can agree, you know, get on and make these changes, right? So, you know, you can do sort of the small, like sort of laying the foundation. So that's not necessarily a bad thing in that way. But I think there is a role in sort of, I think, was it Liz that mentioned it, about we need to make the link between sort of the good things that will hopefully happen as being a consequence of our close relationship with the European Union. So I think, you know, there's 2 sides to that coin, isn't there? I think it gives you more, if it is such a hot topic, it gives you less room to maneuver politically, I think. And if it's more sort of done in a factual kind of way, you can sort of progress with things more effectively. If that makes sense at all. So I sort of meandered around that answer.
No, it actually makes perfect sense, because I've been a bit I don't want to say disheartened, but I found in some ways I found it hard this year because of the apathy. But again, it's twice you've done this in one speech, Simon. You're obviously very good at these talks. Because I've changed my mind again now. I'm thinking, well, actually, now from what you're saying, because people aren't so angry about the subject, it just gives you a chance to have that conversation without people just saying we voted leave and or whatever, you know.
And that's why I mentioned, you know, the energy bills, because that's, you know, really important to a lot of people. And I think you'll find little resistance. Do you support strengthening relationships with the European Union if it will lower your energy bills? And I've always said, yeah, of course. You know, because if you talk about it in that way, I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
And Dave, you should be cheered up, because when we did Pride and Leek, can you remember? There was me, you, and Tony in the market square.
Yes.
And all those people that came to us, probably half of the people who came to talk to us had voted leave and had changed their mind.
Yeah, we did get a lot in Leek, didn't we, actually?
Yeah.
We did get a lot in Leek, yeah. I forget about that.
So it was I thought that was quite encouraging. And they didn't just come, and they had reasons why. They'd actually bothered to find out information, and they'd worked it out for themselves. And the fact that they now said that they'd like to rejoin it, they wouldn't go as far as to say they'd vote in another referendum. Because the other thing I think that we see is people are still scared of having a referendum, because they don't trust politicians. So people have been finding things out for themselves and working it out for themselves, but I don't think they trust politicians if there was another referendum and people started campaigning. I think the other thing we outside our control, there's nothing we can do about it, but trust in the system is very low.
No, I think you're right. If you look at the polling, there's a distinct gap between people that I think, you know, thought leaving was a mistake and people that want to rejoin if it meant another referendum. I think there is because of the bitterness, the division, and the chaos of those few years, people are very apprehensive for another referendum, despite thinking it was a mistake, despite believing we'd be better off as a member.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still better than what it was
Yeah,
3
of
years
course,
ago,
yeah.
where people were entrenched, wasn't it? It's still, yeah. So again, still another good reason why now is a good time to start campaigning, because
Yeah.
people are less entrenched. Yeah.
Yeah. My headline thing, just summary, it's because of these few years, these summits are going to be every year now for the next few years. So we've got a time. This is the time to make change. Yeah, and changes will happen. Well, so it might not be as far or as fast as we want, but they are going to happen. So let's try and push it to go further.
So,
Yeah.
so what does the EM need from not just the activists, but the members and supporters to help them push that? Is it, I know you can write to EMP, but is there like other things we can do to help EM have that weight to say, or even to the all parliamentary group, we have this many supporters, this is what we want, like listen to us now?
Yeah, so I think the weight is hugely important, to show the strength of feeling behind what we're trying to do. And also, the other side, I think it's the local businesses, and like your particular local, speaking to local about the impacts Brexit has on them, because I think those sort of local stories carry real weight with the MPs. So I think we did one in Anglesey with salt, and how they couldn't export to the European. So those to shine a spotlight on the local businesses and the impacts they're having, and that gives the MP political cover to when they speak to other constituents. Well, this business can't trade, so we're making that change. So it makes their job a little bit easier and gives them the cover they need.
Okay, interesting.
One of the issues we've had for a long time is trying to engage younger people, and you can probably tell that from looking at the screen. And a lot of young people, of course, would have been too young to even vote in the referendum, and hopefully are quite pro-Europe. Although I'm, not sure what the evidence is for that. Have you got any hints, tips as to how we can engage young people? Because we really struggle with that.
Yeah, we're not alone. If for those of you that are members of political parties, it's engaging younger people is a struggle across politics. I think the Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, Labour, the demographic is significantly older. This is way out of my sort of knowledge though, but a lot of this is all done on social media these days, isn't it? And how we get better at TikTok and Instagram, and sort of a good social media person, I think could benefit. But I say this is not my not my area at all. But it's a real tough question that I think is shared across various political groups and organisations.
On that point, do you think that the new leader of the Green Party, who seems to be quite good at those sorts of things, do you think he's going to make a difference? Because he's launched himself off by taking Farage on headfirst in Farage's constituency. And he's saying the sorts of things that a lot of young people, particularly I think young women, who seem to be leaning in that direction. So I'm just wondering whether or not he might actually manage to activate some of these youngsters. It's not specifically in the area of rejoining the EU, but one of the big points that he's been making over the last few days is this about cooperation. And he's mentioned several times cooperation at the European level for security, energy, and environment, climate, because things are bigger than borders.
No, that's a really good point. So Ellie Chowns, who he beats, she's vice chair of APPG, and I think her and Adrian, they represented quite a different, my understanding, quite a different vision than Zach. But you're right. He does have an energy about him engaging young people, and how that's going to cross over with Jeremy Corbyn's party. We don't know yet. I mean, because Jeremy Corbyn, famously he did mobilise young people. He could have done.
Well, he was going to get rid of tuition fees, so we won every one of them in one go.
He could have done a bit more during the referendum, but we are where we are. But no, I think if you've got that figure that can sort of make younger people politically engaged, and then hopefully that will have a knock-on effect on groups like ours and others. But it is a very tough question that everyone is struggling with.
But that's something maybe that Caroline Lucas could cash in on, because she's one of our vice presidents, and if he manages to attract a large following, particularly through his social media.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, actually. No, thank you.
Cool. Any more questions for Simon?
I don't
You've
know.
answered a lot there, to be honest,
Well,
Simon.
we'd just like him to have the silver bullet or whatever it's called. So
Yeah, you and me both, to be honest with you. But no, yeah. So changes are happening. Let's be part of that and try and push them to go further. That's sort of the summary, I think. But no, because of all what I've said, I do think it's really important that we've got these branches now. That we are active, we are out there, because I think we're working with the political current for the first time since any of us can remember. I think really.
That's a great point, Simon, and I think you've made me realise that as well. And hopefully, the people on the call today and whoever watches this back will feel, and I feel encouraged by that. And I've been active for 5 years, and I feel more encouraged. So
Great to
hopefully
hear
other people would as well.
It's great to hear someone optimistic, isn't it, for a change?
It is really.
I say that as not as not a Labour supporter as well, but no, I think the government's done a decent job, and we'd like to be in a position, I think, really long term, where, because at the moment they've got the same red lines as Theresa May. They've the three red lines: no single market, no customs union, no single market, no customs union, no return to freedom of movement. They've not changed since 2016.
Yeah.
I think they get away with that partly because people don't understand what that means or what the consequences of it are. One of the things we realised quite quickly, even in the polarised stage where people had come to our street stalls and we'd have loads of yeses and loads of no's because, everybody was either one end or the other. Very, very quickly, when we started saying about rejoining single market, or did you think it was a mistake to leave the single market, we started to get in huge numbers of don't know. So we were asking and people just didn't know what it was. Cliff did, you wrote a few papers, little briefing things, didn't you, to put on the website to try and explain to people what the customs union and the single market were. So I'm not really sure. We did try and persuade the European movement to do some sort of briefing notes and that we could use for educating people, like one-page flyers and that type of thing. Because I think you can't engage with people if you're talking about something that they don't understand, like you mentioned earlier with the electricity market and stuff like that. So I think that there's still quite a lot of technical terms and formalities, and people don't understand supply chains. They only understand one link in the supply chain. So it's a lot of people think, well, I didn't need freedom of movement, so I'm not going to miss anything, without understanding how it impacts on everything from cost of goods and services through to the ability of who they can go and see at a gig.
Yeah. No, you're right. It cuts across everything, and people don't. People don't understand how cross-cutting it is. I think that is an issue. You're right.
One thing we were thinking of doing, Simon, later in the year was to try and do an event on the climate and environment. So this touches back on that paper. I think, did you write it? The campaign paper. I didn't see the launch of that. I was somewhere else, but Helen saw it. So that's
you missed me. That's why we invited you tonight.
Yeah, because we're thinking of doing that, because maybe it's naive, but we think that might be something that's more attractive to younger people.
Yeah, and so that's good. But so there's two parts to that paper, I would say, depending on who you're speaking to. There's the energy bill stuff, which I mentioned before, which sort of has got a more general use, but also but you're actually right, sort of the climate and the environment. We wanted partly to use that to try and sort of get younger people on board.
Yeah.
And what we mentioned to some other groups as well is it Friends of the Earth and these other sort of environmental groups that have branches as well, whether it's worth trying to link up with them or sort of make them aware of the paper or the campaign to try and sort of, what's the word? Is it not cross
Network.
Yeah. So I'm trying to sort of try and sort of whether we can do a joint, maybe do a joint local event.
I think one of the organisations we talked about was the Wildlife Trust.
Yes,
the Wildlife Trust.
Yeah.
You've got some contacts there, haven't you?
I have, yeah. That was the Wildlife Trusts have become a bit more political and active in their campaigning. So that would certainly be the first ones to try for a joint event, see if they can put up a speaker or something.
If there's no more questions left for Simon and you want to drop off and we can discuss these other things, feel free. Thank you for your time, Simon.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Anytime. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.